Before we start out, we have an award to give out. Bra Chris from Apple Podcasts, BRACHRIS username. Your review of our podcast has won some National Land Realty swag. Please reach out to us at marketing@nationallandrealty.com and let us know what your review was, and we will hook you up with some gear. Let's get on with this. Welcome to episode number 42 of the National Land Realty podcast, where we discuss all things land. Our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. My name is Mac Christian, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty. I'll be your host for this episode. Owning a duck impoundment is on the bucket list for every serious duck hunter. The process of buying a duck impoundment or building one is an enormous undertaking and an investment that could pay dividends for generations if done correctly. If you have ever wanted to buy or build a duck impoundment, we have three experts here today to tell you everything you need to know about it. We're talking with North Carolina land professionals Matthew Eakes, Jacob Lyle, and Aaron Sutton. Matthew Eakes and Jacob Lyle not only are land agents with National Land Realty, but are also highly experienced specialists in the building and management of duck impoundments. Aaron Sutton is an award-winning managing broker and a land professional who has sold and consulted on the acquisition of dozens of duck impoundments over his career. In other words, this is a massive amount of information useful for any outdoor enthusiast from some of the best minds in the country on land. Now sit back and enjoy. I am sitting here with a very special group of people. We have the gurus of duck impoundments here. We have Matthew Eakes, we have Jacob Lyle, and we have managing broker Aaron Sutton. Aaron, you were on the show last week. We were talking about the exemplary leadership that you had within your teams, and I see in the background there your outstanding man cave / office area. But I want to make some introductions to the newcomers of the group. Jacob Lyle, I'm going to pick on you first. Tell me a little bit how you sort of arrived doing land real estate in the first place and sort of about your specialty with ducks.
Yeah, so I grew up hunting and fishing. It's always been a passion of mine. Always knew I wanted to work outdoors. Didn't really know that this was an option, but ended up working for a gentleman for a few years managing his properties, and anywhere from food plots to timber management to ponds. And then we also built a couple duck impoundments. And other than hunting some people's duck impoundments at the coast growing up, that was really all the experience I had until I kind of helped build some and learned how they worked. And as I was doing some management for this gentleman and decided to try to do some more land management for other people, one of the avenues that I was interested in was real estate as well, because I've always wanted to own my own property, as well as my own duck impoundment. So why not get as much experience as possible with both of them and get real estate license and try to help folks buy and sell some property, hunt property, recreational property, and in return maybe be able to help facilitate getting a duck impoundment on that property after they've purchased it. So that's kind of how I got into this a little bit, and get to have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I get a little jealous when I'm sitting behind the desk and I see you guys out in the field. Matthew, tell me a little bit how you got started in this.
I was born and raised in Hyde County. My dad introduced me at a very young age, and ever since then, it's just been a part of my life. I love every minute of it. I love every aspect of it. I love the prep work. I love the hunting. I love all the people that goes along with it. As I got older and started to actually be able to do the prep work, I understood that was what I enjoyed the most. Being able to do this year round and turn something from nothing into, something that you planted, you flooded, you hunted, and you drew the management plan for it is just the best thing I can imagine waking up and doing. And how I found myself with the real estate side of this was with a lot of the guys and clients I was working with, started helping them negotiate, some of the properties that they were acquiring. And I realized that, to be good at this and to capitalize on what I was doing, I really needed my real estate license to, help. Not really sure how to say it, but to help myself move forward in life and, to grow as much as I possibly could. So that's really how I found myself where I am today.
Awesome. Thank you both for taking the time to talk to us today. And Aaron, for those who are unfortunate enough to not have listened to the last episode, you run us through a brief intro to yourself.
Yes, I'm the managing broker for North Carolina and Virginia. Matthew and Jacob came to me. Well, Jacob came to me about 3 years ago, and we were able to work out a deal and get him on board. And Jacob kind of works that North Raleigh area. I don't know, there's about 10 or 12 counties that run across the Virginia border north of Raleigh, and he tries to hone in on that area. And then Matthew started working with us last year, and he's taken on the coastal areas for us. Hyde County, Beaufort County, through that area.
Excellent. And then if y'all didn't now just wanted to pitch a question to all you guys, tell me a little bit about Hyde County. And actually, before we do that, if one of you wants to jump in and just define duck impoundments, a 101 level for people that are listening that may not be familiar, and just kind of run through what exactly is a duck impoundment. And I realize I'm probably talking way under a lot of the listeners because a lot of people probably know, but I just want to make sure that we kind of outlook the conversation.
I'll let you take it, Matt.
Basically, a duck impoundment is an assortment of levees or dikes, whatever term you want to use. It's got a water control structure to hold water on a specific area for a certain amount of time throughout the year, whether you want to hold it for a long time or whether you want to hold it for just a short time of duck season. That's what a duck impoundment is.
Excellent. And Aaron, you had a good way to describe, you were talking about Hyde County when I was talking to you in the last episode. Tell me a little bit about Hyde County, and then Matthew, you can jump in there too.
Yeah. So Hyde County is North Carolina's Stuttgart, I guess. Anybody up and down the East Coast, of the United States has probably heard of Hyde County. And some of the old sayings are that every duck that flies up and down the Atlantic Flyway comes through Hyde County at some point in their life. And most of them on multiple flights throughout the year. But it's home for a couple 100,000 ducks at any time in December and January until they get ready to fly back north.
All right. So we got the main area that Matthew, you work in, the ducks go up and down that section of North Carolina. And you're talking about, you all have worked in and specialized in developing water structures and shooting blinds and shooting areas to be able to bring in ducks and be able to hunt ducks, correct?
That's right. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, tell me a little bit about this. So if somebody wants to go out and pick up an area, let's say either there is already an impoundment there, or maybe it's just blank land, right? And they're curious about duck hunting and they want to set up a structure to do so. What do they want to do to select a site? What are they looking for? And even if it's not in Hyde County, right? Because Jacob, you're not in that area, but your opinion as well.
So I grew up doing some duck hunting in Hyde County. My dad's got a camp down there, and kind of like to Aaron's point, if you like duck hunting and you live in North Carolina, it's on your bucket list to duck hunt in Hyde County, whether that's 1 or 2 times, own some land there, a shoreline lease. And so basically in middle school, high school, and college, I grew up going to Hyde County every weekend. And with my business now, some of the land management and plantings we do, even though we're 2 hours away, we still do some. in Hyde County, not to the extent of Matthew, because that's where he grew up, that's where he lives, but that shows how much of a bandwidth Hyde County has. And my experience with helping plant and build duck impoundments, even though not all of them are in coastal North Carolina or Hyde County, that's the best place to try to build or own one, just from the sheer amount of ducks that inhabit that area. But one of the biggest caveats that I run into to some degree is, say we're helping plant or build a duck impoundment for someone kind of in my neck of the woods, which is 2 hours west of Hyde County. We have a completely different soil type, and we have a completely different water table. And so it's been fascinating to kind of learn those water table and soil types of the coast versus here, because, I've got a lot of clay, and if you find clay in Hyde County, you've basically struck gold if you're trying to do any kind of dirt work. But here, I don't have near the amount of topsoil that Hyde County has. So, like when you're building a dike or a levee, you need to have what people call good dirt, or a nice core, or a really nice base to keep that water contained, whether it's the bottom of a pond or a levee or dike around a duck impoundment. Sometimes in Hyde County, you've got to dig really deep to find that, versus in my neck of the woods, that's basically what we've got on the soil surface with hardly any topsoil. So like if somebody wanted to build a duck impoundment around Raleigh, an hour north, an hour west, east, you have to strip the topsoil off of that site to do your dirt work, and then put that topsoil back into that place in order to have your organics to get what you're wanting to plant to grow well. Versus in Hyde County, it's almost all topsoil. And Matt, chime in, because you have more experience in that neck of the woods. But what I've just found is that the soil types play a really big, they hold a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, that's right. Both our areas, we have pros and cons to both. It's like you said, it's very difficult to build a dike here that holds water unless you go deep enough and find that clay soil. And we have to dig core dikes, and sometimes we got to go down 10, 12 feet to find something that we can actually use to, build our dike to hold the water inside of it. But like you said, we don't have to do a lot of dirt work on top to grow good crops because it's already there. So that's definitely our positive on what we have in Hyde.
Yeah, I wanted to zoom out a little bit when somebody's picking out. So we're talking about going in, finding property. Either there's a duck impoundment already there, or maybe you just want to install one. What's the top level view? How many acres do you want?
It really depends. I mean, it depends what goal you're trying to achieve. I mean, if you're looking for this as a club and want several guys in it, you obviously need a fair size duck impoundment, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 acres, something big. If you're wanting something that big, but just a single owner, we look after 4 or 5 acre duck impoundments, and we look after 2,500 acres of moist soil habitat, that we manage the water on all year round. And it really depends what you're after, what your budget is, and what goal you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and is there any on sort of like shooting lanes, shooting distance? If like it's a smaller lot like that, you're going to clear the 5 acre range if you're shooting up, right? So is there any sort of like safety protocols that you consider when you're looking at that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a square duck impoundment, rectangular duck impoundment, normally what we're trying to, anywhere from 7 to 10 acres is about what we need per blind in one of these impoundments, just to be safe. Unless you're around a bend or something like that, you need at least that much acreage to hunt without shooting at each other, or that's the safe. I guess that's the safe way to put it. One of our impoundments, we got a it's about 100 acres and we got 10 blinds in it. Not saying we'll hunt all 10 blinds, but they're, meticulously placed so that we can hunt all blinds if we needed to and not hurt each other in the process.
Yeah, nobody wants to get peppered by their friend.
That's right.
Well, yeah. So go ahead. You just jumped in there.
Yeah. So the other things you got to look at is sometimes you might have a 100-acre block of land there, but the good Lord above only blessed you with 15 acres of suitable soil. So it's not really how big, of a tract of land you have, but it also, you have to look at that specific, what can work for a duck impoundment. Just because you got 500 acres, you might only have 10 acres that you can build on. That's suitable. So you can't get caught up in the size of the tract of land. It's really got to hone in on how much can I use.
Well, and you all just mentioned water. All right. So, and you mentioned digging for, your water table, right? So are you looking to bring into the water table? You're looking to dig down to the water table, or do you bring in external water sources to fill these duck impoundments?
I'll chime in on that one. Go ahead. I'll do that one. It really depends where you are. In the coastal area where we are, we have a lot of salt land or salt water next to us, and depending where that impoundment is, you can't pull external water and put it in your impoundment. So a lot of guys down here do wells. If you're in a place where you got fresh water, then you're pulling it out of ag fields and ag ditches late in the summer and using that water to put in your impoundment. So we're not digging down like to the water table to get it from there. We have to have some sort of source of water, and depending on where the location of it is the deciding factor on where that water comes from.
Do you have to go through permitting to dig a well to pull it specifically for a duck impoundment?
Say that one more time, Mr. Mack.
Do you have to go through permitting to drill a well specifically for duck impoundments?
Yeah, you got to make sure that you're drilling in the right places. But most time we don't have any issues getting permits to do it.
Gotcha. So there is a permitting process that you have to, because most of the time, when you drill a well like that, you got to get a well permit and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we go through the Army Corps of Engineers, and usually that they let us dig in an area to be able to put up a dike. Usually you don't have any issues getting a well to put in either.
Excellent. And then Jacob, what were you were going to chime in here too as well?
I was going to say, in my neck of the woods, most of the time, if there's a duck impoundment, it's normally right up against a river or a large body of water like a lake or a creek that feeds a lake, and that impoundment is honing in on the birds that might use that lake or travel that river corridor. And so a lot of times we'll use, we've got one property where we use an old tobacco irrigation pump. And we just pull water straight from the river and pump it into the impoundment because it's right up beside it. Or use a tractor-driven PTO pump and pump water out of a lake and pump it into the impoundment. So we don't have the saltwater issues that Matthew runs into. So as long as you've got something to move some water and that water is close enough to get it to that impoundment, it's pretty easy.
And that's a different permitting process, right? You're talking about State Water Board, right?
Yeah, there's some permits. It kind of depends on volume, but a lot of our rivers, at least talking about the rivers, we're getting a lot of rainwater that's traveling across the state, a lot of stormwater. And when you get an influx of stormwater, half the time we can put our risers or our water control structures, close them up and catch that storm water. And then maybe you just got to pump a little bit of water. But if it's a really dry time and we're trying to get those impoundments flooded, before duck season, we'll pull the pumps out.
Excellent. And then y'all have mentioned soil quite a few times, and you're differentiating between top soil and sort of the soil in an area that you dig, right, to hold the water. Tell me a little bit about what matters. Aaron, maybe if you could jump in here with, you're talking sandy soils, you're talking clay soils that you've talked about, and then maybe the top soils a little bit.
These two boys are the experts on that. I'm going to let them handle that question.
All right. We'll defer.
So you need to have some organic matter in your soil. It's a lot easier to grow a food plot or a duck impoundment or a lawn on something that's got some topsoil versus something that's dead dirt, clay. When you see them excavating a new house construction or a commercial site, they're stripping that topsoil off and trying to get really good clay to compact so that it's never going to move again to build that building on it. Well, it's the same thing. I think the majority of your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, your soil nutrients are all in that top 1 to 2 inches of dirt, theoretically in my neck of the woods, but in Matthew's neck of the woods, and he can go into detail on why it is that way. It's nothing for it to be a foot or 2 foot of topsoil.
That's right. And I guess the reason we have so much topsoil is many years ago, a lot of the land in Hyde County was underwater for forever. And that's one of the main reasons we have so much topsoil in our area. But as far as the soils go, in our area, we take it to the extreme because the volume of ducks that we get down here, we have to have lots of food, whether it be corn, millet, milo, whatever you're trying to accomplish, we have to have a lot of food. So we have a lot of impoundments around the lake that you got a lot of what we would call grit land. It's kind of gritty. It does have some clay in it. And then we got impoundments away from the lake where it's extremely organic and that kind of soil runs really bad. It's like coffee ground land. And then we have just really good black dirt soil in other areas. And the way we handle all those different types of soil is when we go in and plant our crop, we take soil samples. We take them to our local co-op. We get a printout of what we need for that crop. So every impoundment is different for us, or every area is different for us. And we don't put the same fertilizer on this grit land that we would this coffee ground land, because it might call for something different. Sometimes we need more lime. Sometimes we need something else to make that crop grow. So being that we have so many ducks down here and need so much food, a lot of guys down here are willing to pay a lot of money to make sure that they have that. So for us, the soil, it plays a huge factor, but we have a way of, making our crops work no matter what soil we have in our area.
All right. So you're talking about you're building water. You're trying to provide a water source, still water the ducks can land on. And then you're using the topsoil around that to grow crop, right? You're bringing in food that ducks are going to target. Which types of food are you going to use for that? I mean, what's your primaries? There's you mentioned corn and millet. Are there any others, or is it just strictly like those kind of things?
We love corn, obviously. We have to have it, like I said, with the volume of ducks that we have. But my personal favorite, we do a lot of moist soil. If we've got land big enough that we can do moist soil on, that natural vegetation is what they're eating, from the coast of Canada all the way down to Florida. And depending how you manage will depend on what kind of crops you want to have. I mean, we get a lot of nighttime ducks in this area because we have a big lake called Mesquite National Wildlife Refuge. It's about 75,000 acres. So we have a natural loafing spot during the daytime. And a lot of guys, we put in a lot of corn, and what it does is make them use at night a lot, especially when we have a lot of full moons. But corn is probably everybody's number one. I mean, that's really what holds them there, especially if we get a cold winter. Depending how you manage and how many times you want to hunt that impoundment, we draw up management plans for guys that hunt 2 days a week. We draw up management plans for guys that hunt 4 days a week. And it really depends how you're wanting to hunt. And it's a huge guessing game as to what you need to put in there. And storms are a big factor on how much yield we have. And sometimes a lot of the corn crops get completely flooded out and we have to take a different route to make sure that we have plenty of food. But I mean, ducks love millet. They like milo. We do a lot of screens with Egyptian wheat. We plant some chouffa, and we got a lot of natural nut sedge in our ground up here. But corn is probably your number one of what people want in our area, just because of the volume of ducks and what we have to feed.
Yeah, Jacob,
I would agree with that too. I'm sorry, say that again, Mac.
I was going to say, Jacob, same in your area, is it, or does it differentiate based on?
Yeah. No, it's the same. I wouldn't say that moist soil is as big of a deal here, unless you've got a existing beaver swamp or something similar to where it's not a excavated duck impoundment. It's more managing an existing wetland to where maybe you knocked out a beaver dam and put a Clemson beaver device, which is basically a redneck version of a water control structure. And you can do some water drawdowns to create moist soil on those areas. But anytime you're trying to manage water, it can be difficult unless your water control structures and your grade. So that's where it's really nice to go take a flat existing farm field and build basically a dam around the entire thing, because you've got a pretty even grade. And so that you can control your water, just about across the board of that entire impoundment. You can keep it at 6 inches of water or 12 inches of water or whatever depth you want. But if you've got a beaver pond, or, you dammed up a creek to make a pond or an impoundment, sometimes you've got various depths, and those various depths lead to different species.
I was going to say too, you mentioned even grade, because if you have an uneven grade, you're going to wall up one side more than the other, and invariably you're going to deal with one side that's weaker than the other, right?
Yeah, like I ran into an issue last year where we did some Japanese millet and some golden millet, and we're trying to use water to put, basically when it got to about 6 to 8 inches tall, we tried to put a couple inches of water on it to keep any competing weeds from growing in there, to minimize our herbicide and basically work in general on that impoundment. And it wasn't a very good grade. And when we tried to put a few inches of water on it, what we ended up with was a foot of water on one half and 0 water on the other half. And so we were able to go in there and luckily, take a grade stick and a bulldozer and change that so it wasn't an issue again.
Got you. So when you're building these things, right? So you're targeting, water tables. You try to build up a water supply. You're getting the proper vegetation in there. Maybe it's a rewind on sort of like the process, and it's probably less of a concern maybe for you, Matthew, because you have such a heavy traffic area for ducks. Maybe more of an issue for you, Jacob. If you build it, are they just going to show up, or do you have to be in a specific flyway? Do you have to kind of just watch the skies and figure it out, or is there a way to draw in, or I guess in site selection wise, are there things that you can do to sort of increase your chances?
It's definitely up. A lot of it is definitely up to the landowner. I've seen a lot of impoundments that didn't produce, and they change hands, and all of a sudden they are producing. And a lot of that has to do with the management of the impoundment. And it's a lot of trial and error. I mean, Hyde County, since the 70s has been developed in impoundment. So you got to know that over time we're running out of places closer to the lake, but we're still building lots of impoundments. And you're not going to know how well that impoundment does until you build it and you go through a couple of years of seeing it. But some of these impoundments that are being built even today are producing just like impoundments that were built back in the 70s. There's a lot of trial and error in what we do. There's a lot of no wrong answers until you really have a lot of time to see how it's going to do. Time plays a big factor in what we do.
I would say, so we manage a few impoundments in a few different counties, and they're all kind of different. But the biggest thing that we're trying to play off of is an existing body of water. We definitely don't have the birds that Hyde County has. So If I go take a field in the middle of somebody's deer hunting property and build a beautiful duck impoundment and plant it to the best yielding stand of corn you've ever seen and flood it, more than likely there's going to be some wood ducks in it, almost without a doubt, because they just come out of nowhere when they've got some food and a place to be semi-safe. If you flood it really deep, you might get some ringnecks in there. But odds of shooting the same species of ducks that are going to frequent the impoundments that Matt is taking care of is going to be a lot different. Now, there's some bigger lakes around me, and there's a couple rivers. And if you've got it right on one of those rivers or right on one of those lakes, you're going to probably have a little bit more bird traffic, a little bit higher bird population, especially when the weather gets cold, which we all refer to, but it just seems to never get as cold as we want it to and give us the birds that we want. It's like a 10-year flood, right? Every 5 to 10 years, we get a really good push of birds that affects my area more than Matthew's area. But yeah, we're always trying to hone in on a big body of water wherever we're putting an impoundment up, a new impoundment up in my neck of the woods.
Do you want to avoid areas with a lot of timber around it just for visibility purposes? And then do ducks pattern in on a season-to-season basis? So you mentioned time, Matthew. Is it a case where you can build an impoundment and it might not do so well the first year, but ducks start patterning in on it after a few years? Is that kind of the case, or I'm just trying to get a feel for this?
Yeah. So location is the name of the game, but pressure is what keeps ducks there. How much, we love impoundments with trees around them. If the ducks know where it's at and you don't pressure them too much, they're going to come. They'll be there. What really matters is that location. If that's somewhere they want to be and they're not pressured, they're going to always come there. And we got a lot of guys that, they call and ask, why aren't we doing so well? Why aren't we this? And you gotta really listen to them and ask them what they're doing or what their neighbors are doing. You definitely want some trees around your impoundments if you've got a neighbor that's close. If you got a neighbor that's close that hunts their place a lot, you really need a buffer between you to, kind of shield your ducks from their ducks. And if it's not always a bad thing to have a neighbor, because sometimes they're putting more pressure on their ducks, so they start using your property more if you putting less pressure on them. So there's so many different factors that why one location would be better than the other. And in some places, we have wide open fields, and it is a good thing to not have any trees around it or big buffers, as long as you don't have any neighbors close, because a lot of the ducks, they want that area to be able to stretch out and spread out. But like I say, if you have a smaller piece of property and it's right next to someone else, you definitely want a buffer so that you can manage your own birds.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Aaron, you worked and you've sold and to help buyers acquire a lot of duck impoundment properties. What's a similarity? Is there any sort of like alignment that you see between a lot of the listings that you've worked with, as far as success and degrees of success that they have on those listings?
So everything Jacob and Matthew has said has been pretty spot on my thoughts on things. I've always looked at it as the corn is king, is one analogy, and in Hyde County, and also the person with the most food wins at the end of the season. If you still got food, you're gonna have ducks. A lot of guys get eaten out early. In October, November, they might flood too early, whatever, and the birds hone in on them. And we get a big push of birds early, and they've ate all their food and they have nothing to feed them December, January. So some of that stuff plays into the sales side of it. Location is key, like Matthew said. With that being location, it's kind of like having waterfront property and you're trying to sell a waterfront or a house on the water. People want that. It's the same idea in a duck impoundment. Location is key. So what Matthew was talking about with Lake Mesquite, the National Refuge, if you're closer to it, you have a better chance of having a more productive impoundment, being that you're closer to the X, so to speak. So when you look at it from a sales side, that does kind of bump up your price, being that you're increasing your chances of having successful seasons year in, year out. Typically, we're seeing prices of duck impoundments. 2 years ago, I think we sold 13 duck impoundments in Hyde County for an average of $20,000 an acre on just the impoundment space. 20 acres, you do the math, but that was $400,000. Just right there on that small little bit. You get further away, the price goes down a little bit, unless somebody can show, successful number of hunts throughout the years, that it is a very well producing impoundment, so on. That can help keep the price up, because that's what people are paying for is for the duck hunting, not for, they don't care about the crop yields themselves like Matthew does. Matthew cares about it because it brings ducks. All that they care about is that it brings ducks. Another thing that goes into this is how much does it cost for upkeep? These impoundments are not cheap, first of all, to build, which that varies based on how much that somebody has to dig out, like Jacob was talking about, versus Matthew has to dig deep to find clay. So I'm not even getting to the price of how much does it cost to build a duck impoundment, but I would like to hear these boys talk about, what are they seeing per acre to keeping an impoundment up? I mean, there's a yearly cost, and it can be expensive.
Yeah. So for an existing duck impoundment, Matthew, Jacob, if you guys want to jump in here, because you're in different areas as well. What is the yearly cost that you see on average if there's an existing duck impoundment to maintain that?
On average, like I said earlier, with the volume of ducks that we have down here that we're trying to feed, we have to put a lot of effort into making sure that there's a lot of food. So when we go in and plant a corn duck impoundment or anything else in that impoundment, but when we go in just for the corn, we're planting it just the same way as we would in an ag field, that they're going to harvest for crops. So it's not uncommon to see 200 bushel corn in our corn duck impoundments because of the way we, plant them. We have guys that down here that are paying upwards of $500-$600 an acre just, per acre to plant an acre crop of corn. Obviously, if you go down on your small grain, those corn bags cost about $300 a bag. 2.5 acres to the bag is about what we're getting out of them. But the cost difference for something like millet or milo is mainly just what the bag of seed costs and how many acres that seed bag will do. So, on millet, you're going to get like 10 acres to the 50-pound bag. On corn, you're getting 2.5 acres, and it's a $300 bag of seed. So, like I said, corn, you're talking $500-$600 an acre just to plant an acre crop of corn down here. So it's a substantial amount of money. And that's why a lot of our guys, they'll plant, half their impoundment in corn, and they'll plant the other half in millet or milo, or we'll manage it in moist soil. I have one place that we look after is 2,500 acres of, WRP land. Obviously they can't plant, more than 50, 60 acres of corn a year because of the cost of corn. So they pay me to look after the moist soil, and we, do a lot of mowing, we do a lot of disking, and all that's, basically by the hour. We do a lot of disking, and we'll do disking for $15, $20 an hour, depending how big the disc is. We'll do mowing depending how big the mower is, whether it's a 7-foot mower, 14-foot mower, whatever it may be, anywhere from $50 to $100 an hour. And depending on the size of the property, depends on how much cost you're going to be running into.
Yeah, Jacob, same in your area?
So I would say that my niche is a little bit different because 99% of the time, almost all the time, we're loading up a tractor and implements onto a gooseneck trailer and hauling them with a pickup to a property. So our cost with travel is substantially higher than that because, some days we get the luxury of only having to go 20 or 30 minutes down the road. Other days, we're having to haul equipment 2 to 3 hours away from home, use that equipment on a property, get all our materials. So, Matt was talking about seed, but you've also got to factor lime, fertilizer, herbicide. And most of the time when you're planting corn or any other crop, you are going to work the dirt up some. Then you're going to apply your soil nutrients, lime, fertilizer, and then you're going to plant. And then you might even make a herbicide, a herbicide application, a pre-emergent. And then you're going to come back a week, 2 weeks later, depending on whether you've used pre-emergent or not. And then a lot of times you've got to use a post-emergent herbicide. And then you've also got to top dress, in regards to corn, you've got to put some nitrogen on it when it's a few weeks old to get it to jump and really do a good job. So if we've got to travel 2 hours to a farm, we might have to go to that farm 2, 3, 4 times during that whole growth process of whatever's been planted in the impoundment. And then we've got to come back again to flood it. And then we're going to have to come back to keep whatever we're pumping. If it's a tractor or a pump, we might have to bring that pump there and come back a couple times every other day throughout a week to keep diesel fuel in that pump. So yeah, duck impoundments are about, we do some deer food plots and turkey food plots and burns and a few other things. But when it comes to probably the most labor intensive and expensive thing we do is manage duck impoundments, because, some of the impoundments that aren't in Hyde County, that are just various impoundments on rivers and lakes in my neck of the woods, there's not a lot of other impoundments around, which means there's not too many other avenues for them to have it planted and maintained. So a little bit different style, but it's kind of the same thing at the end of the day when you're there managing it.
Yeah, and both of you mentioned specifically, the cost that it takes to maintain in terms of planting corn, which you've got to do on a yearly basis, right? Just by the nature of corn. So are there additional costs also incurred for, let's say, managing the actual, like the water area, right? Like to manage, your large pond or your small pond that you have there? What's kind of the kind of maintenance that you have to do on that on a yearly basis?
You have your, basically your planting costs, your flooding costs, depending on how you're getting your water, like Jacob said, whether it's through a well, whether we use a tractor with a PTO pump. And really, the only other cost that you're really running into for keeping up that property, you got a lot of mowing that goes along with it, to keep all your vegetation down, make your dikes drivable. But one of the things that we run into a lot is a lot of dike repairs, levee repairs. We have, over time, we have a lot of nuisance, nutrias and muskrats, and in my area, they dig into the dikes and they make tunnels, and eventually we start having leaking dikes, and we've got to bring in an excavator, bulldozers, everything to grade that dike back in, put a new core ditch in it. But other than that, that's really all we have to really look after. Now, you got a lot of blind management. We got to keep up our blinds, whether it's a wooden blind or a pit blind, we have to do maintenance on them. You're depending who you are, sometimes you get 5 or 10, 15 years out of a wood blind, depending on how you want to see that blind. And then the pit blinds, some blinds we're doing these days, we're going to get 15, 20 years out of them before they need replacing. And that's really, a lot of guys come down and do it on the weekends, or they'll pay me to go in and look after a lot of that for them, keeping their blinds intact. They got the brush them before we start flooding. But that's about all the cost that comes with it, as far as keeping the land up that I know of.
So both of you guys are talking about planting corn in marshy ground. what's the best way to sow that corn when you're talking about it, right? Like, cause I'm thinking about it, like if it's kind of mucky, or you're probably going in an off season, right? Where maybe it's a little drier. Tell me a little bit about that, just because I'm curious.
It's definitely good. So you're using a corn planter, or, people will just call it a planter, but there's an implement that's dedicated strictly for planting corn. You can switch out, it depends on the style. You can switch out certain portions of it. Like we've got a planter that we use to plant corn and sunflowers with. We don't plant anything else with it. And there's completely different styles and as technology grows, but we're using kind of a 3-point kind of custom corn planter. Like I said, we've got to be able to fit everything we've got on an 8-foot wide trailer. We got a couple different ones. Our biggest one's 36 feet, but we've got to have an equipment operator, a piece of equipment, an implement, and materials, and be able to go from our home base to someone else's property versus Matt. And some of the duck impoundments that we're managing aren't as big as some of the ones down east. But I know that Matt probably hardly ever uses a 3-point 2 or 3 row corn planter. He's planting with a bigger setup because he's managing bigger impoundments. But I can't, a 6 or 8 row corn planter is 30 foot wide. I can't take that down the road. Or if I did, it would be very, very expensive to do so, because that would be the only thing we could fit on the trailer. We have to put it on sideways, and that adds a whole nother trip to the farm and back, or 2 more trips, 1 more there and back, and another one to get it off of that farm and move it somewhere else. So it might take me longer to plant something because I'm using a smaller piece of equipment because we're mobile.
Yeah, and before Matthew jumps in here, Jacob, what's sort of your time cost per acre as you're planting corn? I'm just curious about how long it takes you with a smaller planter to do that.
And I would say that it really kind of depends. You are hitting on whether it's wet or dry.
Yeah.
We've got an impoundment that we manage that once you get to the farm, it's about a mile down a gravel road. And that gravel road has a very intensive slopes up and down. It's basically some river bluffs leading down to a bottom, and this impoundment's right in that bottom, right up beside the river. And it takes us, and it's about a 10-acre impoundment, and that 10-acre impoundment takes me longer to do anything in than any of the other impoundments that we manage that might be a little bit bigger, because we can't hardly drive a pickup with our gooseneck trailer to it. We've got to unload everything and go a mile down that gravel road, up and down those hills, use the tractor to disc it up, then drive the tractor a mile back up and down those hills and put the spreader on it, and then drive it all the way back and spread your lime and fertilizer and everything. So everything we do is property and site based. I can't just say, hey, I'm this much an acre or I'm this much an hour, because every property is different, because the landscape, if you go 30 minutes in any direction from my house, it's completely different soil type and terrain, because I'm kind of right on the edge of flat land and hilly land. So if I'm going west or north, I'm getting into some hillier ground. If I go east, I'm getting into flatter ground. If I go south, I'm getting into sandier ground. So most of the time, if somebody's got an impoundment, whether they want to build it or have us plant it, I won't say a single monetary value until I put eyes on it. I'll tell them, hey, I'll come. If you let me know the next time you're going to be there, I'll come look at it, and I'll tell you what it's going to take for us to do whatever you want done out here.
That's a really important.
So I have to.
Yeah.
That's my job. I have a couple guys that work for me that do the majority of the work, and 90% of my job is meeting with customers and quoting jobs, and then giving my guys what they need to knock it out.
That's a really important point that you just made there for both current owners and prospective owners, the people that are interested in purchasing a duck impoundment. Is you're not going to go out and get a set rate on like, okay, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to plant the corn. It's going to cost me this much because the guy down the road has this cost, or I talk to somebody else in a different area that has this cost. It's really going to depend on the topography of what you're working with. And I mean, there's so many variables that you're just not going to get that up front. It's hard to get that assessment. Matthew, if you could jump in sort of how you manage the planning.
Yeah. So unlike Jacob, it's nice where I live and work, because most of our work is within 30 minutes. Unless I'm doing some consulting, I'll run around and do consulting work for people, but all of our impoundments are within, 30 minutes of our shop. Whether it be to the north, south, east, west, whatever, it's fairly close. So everything we do, we hardly ever take equipment on trailers. And we try to do a lot of our properties. When we start here, we kind of hit every property, and we're looking after, we're planting, 30 duck impoundments a year. So on the north side of the county, we start up there and we break all those land down. A lot of that land gets hit twice with a disc. And we make our big round like that and get everything, knocked down after the season, talking in April, basically we knock everything down, and start the process. And then we make our rounds again. We'll pull a disc and pull bedders in front of it, after we get all the fertilizer in. And then at the same time, we may be pulling the planter that same day or vice versa. We may end up spraying pre-emerge. It really just depends how much work it's going to be to make that ground plantable. And the smallest planter we have, for planting these corn duck impoundments, we have a 4-row planter and we use an 8-row planter. And that 8-row planter, we can do anywhere from 4 to 7 acres an hour. And travel does play an effect on how we price out our jobs. But most of the time it's relatively the same. It doesn't change much. Like Jacob, he might be driving an hour, 2 hours to get to a job. Ours, we're only going, 30, 45 minutes down the road on a tractor. And most jobs we hit, on our way or coming back from the last one. So it's definitely different than what Jacob has to do. I don't envy him at all on having to travel with.
Yeah, you sound kind of spoiled.
I will say we are spoiled, especially with the volume of work. But this is really, during the summertime, this is all we do. We selling as much real estate as we can, and right now we're 80, 90 hours a week on tractors, just breaking it down. We stopped planting corn to get on this call. I come run, jumped in my truck to be able to make this happen. So, and I got my dad to relieve me, but yeah, it is this time of year. We're going hard at it to make it all work, because we got a lot of people relying on us for a very short window. When we plant, basically from early May into July, but most of our corn crop really needs to go in during May. That's what we need to get. We need all our daylight hours to be able to produce the corn crop that needs to come off, so that we have plenty of food. Now we're planting a lot of small grain stuff in June and July, but the biggest amount of our work is right now.
Awesome. Well, and so you both have mentioned pit blinds versus wood blinds. Aaron, you mentioned that too. How do you pick between what you use? Is it preference? Is it landscape based? What decides which kind of blinds you use?
I'll jump on that one. It really depends. The group of guys that you have the group of guys that own that specific piece of property. I mean, I work with, guys that are really young, and guys that are really young. A lot of them want pit blinds, and I don't blame them. They're hide well. You see, from what I've seen, we see a lot of closer shots with pit blinds. But for the older generation, a lot of the old timers don't want to crawl down in a pit blind. They're hard to get out of. They're a little bit dangerous. When you're hunting with a dog, if the dog gets away from you, you're at eye level, ground level with the dog, and a lot of people don't see them. And there's a lot lot different maintenance to a pit blind compared to a wooden blind. A lot of guys like to be able to take their blinds out of the impoundment, to be able to plant their crop and then put the blinds back where they want it. So like on a lot of first, 1, 2, 3 year impoundments, we'll do wooden blinds first until they figure out where the X is in that impoundment. And then they'll spend the money to put in a nice pit blind. So it really just depends the setup of the land and personal preference, really. I do not suggest pit blinds for, the older generation. They're not used to them. They really don't like them. And then we have, clients that love them. We put in probably 10 to 15 pits a year on average for a lot of different guys.
I was going to say, you get more gray hair on you, your knees start going bad, and it's getting in and out of a hole isn't as fun.
Yeah, that's right. And it's really my job to kind of give them the options. I'm not sold on any one thing. I love a pit blind. I love a stake blind. And I think different impoundments need, one or the other or a little bit of both. I like to be able to move that blind so that it's in a better spot for the next year. Or I like the stationary pit depending on how they like to hunt. A lot of guys kind of have their own group, and when they figure out how to hunt that specific area, that's what they want every time.
Awesome. Well, I got 2 more questions to heckle you two after, and then I want to let you go because, as you said, and I don't think I noted it at the beginning, but I think both of you guys are right now sitting in trucks. Am I right there?
Yeah.
So I need to let you all get back to work. So the first question, you mentioned a few times, Aaron, you mentioned not wanting to even touch that territory, but now I got to ask and put you all on the spot is if you got flat grounds, no crops planted, haven't done a thing, what should you be estimating? And give me a broad range just so that people know and are aware of what kind of cost are you looking at to build a duck impoundment. And we're talking not state of the art. We're talking needs to be functional and bring in ducks.
I would say that it really depends on the site, right? And that's a touchy subject because you've got, it's like building a house, right? There are some people that might put a little more elbow grease and care and love into it than others. And then you've also got to factor whether that site is an existing ag field or if it's wooded. We've got a property we're building an impoundment on this summer in my neck of the woods, which like I keep saying, but I have to differentiate that it's so much different. Matt's backyard and my backyard are so much different, but this is a site that has like a natural bowl to it that butts up to a very large swamp system. And what we did is we brought in a friend that's a consulting forester and had him clear cut that site. And our customer was able to retain the income from that cutover or that timber harvest. And then in return is rolling that money back into the property by getting us to build him an impoundment. Well, we've got to go in there with 60,000 pound excavators with hydraulic thumbs and pop all those stumps out of the ground after the harvest. And a lot of it was hardwood, big mature hardwoods. We left specific ones where we wanted to with the layout of the impoundment. But when you've got to pump or pull 40-inch diameter white oak stump out of the ground, that's no small feat. And if you've got 10 acres of that to do, I mean, that's a big hole. That's a really big deal. That's a really expensive project. But if you've got an existing ag field that all you've got to do is take an excavator around it, dig a ditch, throw that off to the side, and get your core made, and then put that topsoil back on top, and then dress it up with a bulldozer, that's a little bit less work, even though if it's a 100-acre field that you're doing it to, that's still a substantial amount of work. So it really all comes down to the person quoting the impoundment and what their cost per hour for heavy equipment is. And everybody's heavy equipment rates are different, right? if somebody's got 10 employees and 2 brand new pieces of equipment, his overhead cost is a lot more than someone who might have 1 excavator and 1 employee, or they're doing it themselves and they already have that excavator for something else that, you know, they already own it for their own personal use or for their farm, or they're a logger that also can do some dirt work on the side. So it's kind of sticky a little bit because everybody's price is going to be different. If somebody wanted a duck impoundment built 15 minutes down the road by Matt, or if they wanted that same impoundment done by me, Matt's going to be cheaper because it's right there. I wouldn't be able to do it for what his cost would be. And so I can't put a monetary value on building someone an impoundment. There's run-of-the-mill pricing for different areas. But if I sat here and said it's this much an acre to build an impoundment, you would only be able to apply that amount to whatever property specifically I'm talking about.
And I'm happy you went into that kind of detail. It's probably more of a setup question there, because really a lot of what you've spoken to and what I wanted to clarify for anybody looking to build one is you're not going to go in and say, okay, I want to build a duck impoundment. It's going to be $50,000 or $20,000 or $10,000. You're not going to be able to put a monetary value on that until you have the site assessed. And you probably talk to a few different people who manage those things, right? And to be able to go in and look at it and give you a proper quote and tell you what to look for. And you're not going to know going in what it is unless you've talked to somebody like yourself, right?
Yeah. And a lot of times just to be upfront, most of the time, and I'm sure Matt's the same way, most of the time, if someone inquires about wanting an impoundment built or a management plan written or planted, you've come recommended to them from someone else. So there's already a little bit of a trust factor that has already been grandfathered in from a previous client. And a lot of times I'll be upfront with potential prospects, and I'll just be like, hey, you know, a lot of people, just like we said earlier, bigger is better. And most of the time people have very high aspirations. Hey, you know, I will want to do a 30-acre impoundment here. And they don't realize that the fact that there's trees there right now means that it's going to cost twice as much to do that project. And so I'll just be like, hey, you know, I know you got our number from so-and-so and they were happy we did a good job for them. You know, you tell me you want a 30-acre duck impoundment here. You know, I just want to be straight up and clear for both of our sakes. What's your budget? Because, you know, your budget and the numbers that are going through my head right now might be in completely different stratospheres. And if that's the case, let's go ahead and figure that out right now before I spend 2 days quoting this.
That's terrific insight. Matthew, I'm guessing the same in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, exactly the same. Trying to get the budget up front to know, you know, if you're on the same page is huge. But as far as you were hitting on price a lot, we just got finished and we actually started planting it today, about a 40-acre impoundment. From start to finish, it was raw land. It had some existing ditches on it, but it was grown up, you know, 7-8 year vegetation. I had to bring the bulldozers in, clear it all off. And basically the turnkey price for that whole 40-acre impoundment to be built, planted, and the whole 9 yards was somewhere around $90,000 or so. So that's just giving you just giving you some insight on what these things cost. We also quoted a 72-acre duck impoundment to be built. It used to be about a 35-acre duck impoundment. We built it. We're doing it right now, making it bigger, having to do all the clearing and everything for it. And that impoundment is going to cost well over $100,000 to do all the core ditching, all the clearing that needs to be done, and everything. It's a pretty heavy cost. But once they have it, you know, they have an asset that's worth, you know, maybe even double than what they've got in it, or triple or quadruple. So as long as they can afford it up front, you know, they're building something that in the future will sell, you know, most time for way more than what they got in it. If they can withstand the cost at the beginning.
That's also an important note. So yeah, I want to hit you both with one more last question, and I want to give you both a chance to sort of plug your business here. So last question is, how many people do you work with that manage their own impoundment, and like rough percentage, and how many people hire people to manage, like yourselves, their duck impoundments?
Jacob, go ahead.
So we do some seed sales. We are a dealer for Eagle Seed and for Real World Wildlife Products. So I get some inquiries from do-it-yourselfers, but I would say that I've never had anybody inquire about seed or have talked to anybody that manages duck impoundments on their own. They might do some deer food plots or some dove fields or turkey plots on their own. But when it comes to duck impoundments, they are either getting someone like me or Matt to help them do it, or maybe they've got a local farmer that they have some kind of agreement with for planting corn. And maybe they have a well in place where they can just flip a switch and put water in there and kind of manage flooding the impoundment and draining it themselves and getting a farmer to help with the planting. But not a lot of people at all that I know of that handle their duck impoundment A to Z on their own.
Matthew,
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, same for you.
Yeah, it's about the same. Just keep in mind, it takes a pretty wild individual to do this kind of work to be extremely, extremely successful. I mean, we you know, sometimes depending on what kind of storms you got or what kind of breakdowns you have. I mean, a lot of it, you know, you're up 1-2 o'clock at night running pumps. You know, you're on the tractor till midnight. It really just depends, you know, what kind of client you run into. I mean, some of my clients they want everything done. They don't want any kind of input. They don't want anything. They're like, Matthew, here's my grounds. You figure it out. And then we got other clients that want to be, you know, right there the whole every step of the way. We got a lot of guys that do some of the work themselves. You know, they'll disc their impoundments before we get there. And obviously we take that off our per acre price on how we would plan it for them. Some guys, you know, they want this kind of seed, and some guys, they want exactly what we want or what we would do. So it really just depends the client. But no, everybody has, you know, a point of contact. And I think that Jacob and I are the point of contact. Most of the time I get people that call me all the time just asking questions, you know, and I'm happy to answer anybody's questions. You don't get paid for a lot of that stuff, but if you answer everybody's questions, they remember that and they'll suggest you to the next guy, or, you know, or use you for a job that they eventually will have. So that really doesn't bother me any. That I get lots and lots of questions, because it always works out for us in the end, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, so, all right. I know that both of you, like I said, both hanging out in trucks in the middle of nowhere and ready to probably chomping at the bit to get back to work and go do the thing. Both of y'all work with National Land Realty. Both of y'all work as consultants and work with Duck Impoundments. So I want to give you a chance to plug your business, since you've given us an hour of your time today. Jacob, kick us off and tell us how to get a hold of you and what you specialize in.
All right. So the name of my company is Wildflow Habitat Management, and you can find us online, Wildflow, WILDFLOW, habitatmanagement.com. All our contact information is on there. We specialize in kind of turnkey recreational property management. So if you've got a property that you just like to deer and turkey hunt, we'll come in there and help write a management plan, install food plots, and conduct controlled burns, install deer stands. If you've got a tract that's just strictly a duck hunting property and it's got a duck impoundment or a couple duck impoundments, we can come in there and either help facilitate building you one and then taking on the management, or if you've got an existing impoundment that you'd like to have planted and flooded, and we can do that as well. So we also do a little bit of forestry mulching. We've got a skid steer mulching unit. My kind of elevator pitch is, if it has to do with a hunting property and we can't do it in-house, we've got somebody on speed dial who can. So if it's deer hunting, turkey hunting, duck hunting property in North Carolina, we can provide some value one way or another.
All right, Matthew.
Yeah, my company's name is Whispering Woods Consulting. We specialize in recreational, private land, hunting land mostly. We do waterfowl is what we specialize the most in. We also do a lot for deer and bear hunting in our area. We construct duck impoundments, do lots of repairs. And for the consulting side of my business, I work with a lot of different subcontractors. Like Jacob said, if it's something that we don't specifically do, we've got a contact to do it. Any custom wildlife management that you want done, we have a way of getting it done. So you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. And my number is 252-542-9160. And we're happy to help in any possible way we can.
Excellent. Well, hey, I appreciate both of y'all's time. I know, like I said, you took time away from your work today to do this. Very much appreciate that. Aaron, I know that you are in your office, so I'm not going to, thank you also for being here. I was going to give you a hard time, but I do appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, look, my little plug is any of these duck impoundments, I have a gun and I will travel. So
I have an equal sales pitch on that then.
I appreciate you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you guys very much for giving us your time.
Thanks, Mac. Thank you.
This concludes episode number 42 of the National Land Realty podcast, discussing everything you need to know about duck impoundments with land professionals Aaron Sutton, Matthew Eakes, and Jacob Lyle out of North Carolina. Honestly, if you didn't learn anything from this episode, you should probably go back and listen to this again. All right, you can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com.